Hello and welcome to the 10th in my series of CPD Coffee Times with me, Dr Tina Rae. Today we're going to focus on building resilience in ourselves and in children and young people using key tools from positive psychology. And this session aims to bring you an overview of positive psychology. It's a basic introduction, but also provides some really useful and helpful pointers as to things that we can do right now to increase the level of happiness that we're experiencing on a daily basis, reducing our stress levels. So many of you will know my background, formerly as a teacher, and I trained to be a psychologist in 2000, and I currently work as a consultant psychologist for Compass Fostering. And I also write extensively. In many of my publications you'll find it with Nurture UK, who are my favourite charity, I would say, and I have a very long really positive relationship with them, having produced many evidence-based resources to promote the well-being and mental health of our children and young people. And also, of course, I write extensively for Hinton House Publishers, for Sarah Miles, who is the most ethical publisher I've met, and is absolutely, like myself, passionate about promoting the well-being and emotional health and well-being of children and young people. It's never been more important. So hopefully you'll be able to look up some of these publications. I'm going to make reference to the Wellbeing Toolkit for mental health leads in particular today, and also just reinforce the fact that I am a positive psychologist. This is my philosophy underpinning the work that I do. So many of the tools and strategies I'm going to present today you will find in my various publications. So the aims of today's session are basically to introduce the key messages of positive psychology, consider what we call the cycle of flourishing, and explore some of the key strategies and ideas that enable us to flourish and maintain our mental health and overall well-being. And also provide you with an opportunity to reflect on this topic. If you're doing this with a smaller group of colleagues or even individually, it's a time to actually stop and think and reflect on the ideas and some of the strategies that I'm going to present today. Martin Seligman is the psychologist that I would refer you to if you want to find out more about positive psychology, the leading light in this particular area. He talks about positive psychology as underpinning lives that go well. And it's a combination of feeling good and functioning effectively. And he talks about happiness, well-being and flourishing. But I need to say at the outset that this is not just a simple task of gaining more happiness or being more happy. I think all of us are able and should be able to have and encounter more happy moments on a daily basis. But I think that the notion of happiness has been slightly misused in some quarters and people have kind of misunderstood it. What we're really talking about with happiness is contentment. What we're really talking about is connection and a life of meaning, which is what gives us a greater level of contentment and happiness. Also, this positive psychology approach focuses on human strengths and building resilience, not upon our deficits. So also consistent with, I suppose, solution-focused approaches as well. And it also does include the negative experience of negative emotions and how we manage them successfully. So again, very solution-focused. Seligman talks about happiness as being on 3 levels. So at level 1, we'll have those momentary feelings of pleasure when something is really lovely. We've bought something beautiful or we've had a nice drink with friends, whatever it is. Level 2 is the happiness that we get from making these positive judgments about our feelings, the things that we experience emotionally that give us a sense of well-being. Level 3 is real quality of life, meaning, quality of life when we actually flourish and we do really well both emotionally and in every area and aspect of our lives. So in Seligman's hierarchy of happiness, he talks about the pleasant life, which gives us pleasure and a level of positive emotion. Then he talks about the engaged life, where we participate in those activities which are really intrinsically interesting and rewarding for us. And these are the ones that induce flow for us. So I'm going to do another session on creative education and the experience of flow. So I won't go into it in too much detail other than to say that flow and you make reference to Csikszentmihalyi's work here, is that feeling when we are in the moment, when we are not aware of time passing and we're doing something possibly creative or physical, such as sports or art or painting, whatever it is, and we don't notice time passing. So that level of engagement, which gives us a sense of meaning and purpose. Then he talks about the meaningful life, which is really ultimately the goal, I think, for all of us. So serving a goal bigger than yourself, particularly using what he calls your signature strengths or strength. Ultimately, positive psychology aims to help us discover what makes us thrive in life. So it looks at questions like what contributes to happiness, what are the health effects of positive emotions, what habits and actions can we undertake that can build personal resilience. So we know from much of the research today that negative emotions such as anger, anxiety, sadness can impact on our mental health in quite negative ways, can trigger stress responses, and ultimately can trigger and contribute to chronic stress, which makes us more susceptible to cardiovascular disease and other physical ailments. So positive psychology research has now found that positive emotions can aid health by undoing the physical reactivity that can lead to these problems and difficulties. So an ultimate goal here is to enable us as human beings to thrive. So the cycle of flourishing. This is really very, very interesting. Okay, so we're kind of ensuring that we enable the layers of social connections that we have, connecting with other people. These relationships are what give us meaning and purpose, and also ensure our mental health and well-being if they're positive. They allow us to be creative, so exploring our interests and talents and being curious about things. When we've found that our area of creativity, something that we love, something that we're passionate about, whether that's sport, whether that's writing, whether that's actually helping other people, we practice it. So we can actually explore this and learn how to persist and show true grit in practicing the skills that we've learnt in that creative process. Ultimately, by actually practicing and working hard, we can then achieve a sense of mastery in this particular area. And this is a really, really powerful motivator for both adults and children, because it teaches us confidence. So I can really do this. I'm really hooked into this. And what it's giving me then is a sense that I am being recognised for my creativity and my mastery of my particular area. So it's a really, really important, because it gives a sense of real social morality here, that we are part of something, which enables us then to connect. So there's this whole cycle of flourishing that Martin Seligman sets out for us. And this cycle of flourishing is what enables us to build a sense of resilience, core resilience, which is that universal capacity that allows us to prevent, minimise or overcome the damaging effects of adversity. So this is not about being happy all the time. And I think this is the main criticism. When people don't understand it and they look at positive psychology on a superficial level, they will think, oh, it's just people talking about let's be happy all the time, which is impossible. We know it's impossible, but what is possible is to engage in this cycle of flourishing, begin to develop those meaningful relationships in our areas of creativity and mastery, and the resilience that we need in order to bounce back when things do go wrong, because they will. And we will not experience a level of happiness every day that is similar. We will have some days which are better than others, and we will have increased levels of resilience on other days, but we need a core bank of that resilience in order to manage the everyday stresses that we will experience. In terms of building resilience for ourselves and the kids that we work with, we know that we need to engender core beliefs that are really very positive. So I matter as an individual, okay? And this is really, really important. And in order to feel that I matter as an individual, I have to engage in positive relationships that engender safety and nurture. So engaging in active listening with quality time. I need to feel open, that I can talk to people about my concerns and connect with them emotionally. And children need this more than ever at this current time. I have strengths that I can rely on and share. So again, this is about resource activation, recognising and identifying things that the child or the adult does well, often and with energy. So really celebrating those and drawing them out. So this is a strengths-based approach, drawing on my strengths. Also, I can learn from failure. So again, look back to the session that I did on growth mindset, fixed mindset, with focusing on the work of Carol Dweck, and also this notion of praising effort rather than ability. Very, very important. We need to actually ensure that this is embedded in our narratives, in the way in which we engage with our children and young people. In this way, we can actually begin to really build resilience and teach resilience. We need to recognise the three significant patterns that are essential to this resilience. So one is cultivating hope, a hopeful future, a hopefulness that things can be better, that I can change things. Practicing critical awareness and letting go of numbing and taking the edge off vulnerability, discomfort and pain. And I refer you to the work of Brené Brown, absolutely key and central in this area. And I think this letting go of the numbing and taking the edge off vulnerability, discomfort and pain, we're going to come back to again in this presentation. Positive psychology is underpinned by hope. So a way of thinking or a cognitive process. And there are a trilogy of goals, pathways and agency here. Hope happens when we have the ability to set realistic goals. I know where I want to go. When we set unrealistic goals, we become anxious, we get overwhelmed by them. And lots of anxious children, young people and adults do this. They find it very difficult to set realistic goals and break them down step by step. So teaching this, very, very important. We can work out how to achieve them and stay flexible and develop alternative routes. And again, this is learning from mistakes. This is being able to go with the flow and understand that it doesn't always go as planned, and we need to be flexible and adjust. And this is part of resilience here, and being hopeful overall. I know how to get there. I'm persistent. I can tolerate disappointment and have another go. So this is, really, really essential. I can have another go. Even if it goes wrong, I make a mistake, I'll stop, I'll reflect, I'll think about it, I'll make another plan. Also, hopefulness. We believe in ourselves. I can do this. So these affirmations, and again, I'm going to do a session on affirmations later in this series specifically. So to learn this sense of hopefulness, what do we need? We need relationships that are characterized by optimism, boundaries, and consistency. So this again is about nurture, about those relationships that we engage in that induce and encompass a level of safety that allows us to develop our overall well-being and sense of hopefulness. In this arena, we also need to be able to value and feel that what we do is valued if we are persistent and we work hard. It's about process praise again, praising me as I'm doing my job, saying why I'm doing it well, what's going well, and being really, really grateful for that. But it's about persistence and hard work. I'm not going to give up just because the going gets tough. And hopeful self-talk sounds very clear. This is tough, but I can do it. This is tough. I can't do it now, but I will be able to do it. I can't do it yet. Okay, so again, going back to that growth mindset. At the heart of hope is tolerance for disappointment and a determination and a belief in self. So I can tolerate this level of disappointment because I will be disappointed. I will get things wrong. I will fail. It's fine. And this is where self-compassion must also come in. So very, very important that in order to really maintain a level of hopefulness, perseverance and develop true grit, we need to practice what I call critical awareness. And this is about reality checking the messages and the expectations that drive this never good enough gremlins. So let's think back to cognitive behavioural approaches, CBT, and this notion that we need to actually challenge our level of ineffective thinking. This is such a core skill that all of us need to learn and make use of. And again, this is also, really questioning, what am I seeing? Is it real? Is what I'm seeing real? Are these messages real or fantasy? Do they reflect healthy living, or do they turn me into a commodity? So thinking about how we are manipulated, particularly by social media and advertising. Who benefits me? Who benefits by me feeling bad about myself? And this is really important. Who benefits by me feeling bad about myself? Money, control, other people wanted to control me, other people wanted me to spend my money on things that ostensibly should make me feel better, new clothes, new commodities, things that I think I need because I'm being presented with these images that would make me suggest that, I'm not good enough. So we need to practice that, and we need children to be able to do this at a very early age. So I think, again, teaching critical media skills, so being able to actually analyse what's going on and what's being presented to us is also key here. But essentially, it's about questioning, is this real? Are these images real or fantasy? Why is this so important? Are they really turning me into a commodity? So something to think about. And we know, sadly, that most of us do want to reduce feelings of vulnerability, pain and discomfort. This is part of the human psyche. It's quite normal and natural. Unfortunately, addictive behaviours can be numbing and they can take the edge off feelings. And this is why so many people get sucked into addictive behaviours around alcohol, drugs, and also engage in self-harm, because it is addictive behaviour and it can numb you, it can take the pain away. If you're experiencing deep psychological pain, I'm going to do a whole session on self-harm later in the series, so we can come back to that. But we cannot selectively numb emotions. When we numb painful emotions, unfortunately, what happens is we also numb positive ones, and this is why the addiction route is so ultimately damaging, because actually what we're not doing is allowing ourselves to experience any positive emotions. So numbing and taking the edge off is not a route that we want to go down or encourage our children to. This is where we need to actually be talking about this and developing our ability to engage more positively and challenge those negative automatic thoughts we get regularly. So thinking a lot at the moment about teacher stress and retention, more than ever, I think, obviously because of what's happening with the current COVID pandemic. These are very, very real issues, and we know that the burnout and emotional labour of teaching is enormous, and that people have been bombarded with a range of initiatives. Many of them some of them have been pretty outrageous in terms of actually the expectations, particularly on teachers, in terms of their time. And the long hour cultures in particular is pretty difficult, plus the lack of availability of any form of flexible working. This may well change. This may be something positive that comes out of this lockdown period and the gradual transition back into school, as we may have to be, I think, more flexible, and that teachers, TAs, etc., anyone working in education at this current time will find that their job will change considerably. But again, that also engenders a certain level of stress that we need to remember, because this lack of work-life balance has an impact on our relationships and social life, and this whole new normal around COVID needs to be navigated. So I think more than ever there's a need for us to be hardy individuals who are resilient and can effectively manage this, but also those in senior roles in schools more than ever need to actually be leading by example here and providing the necessary resources for people to maintain and protect their well-being, and also protect the level of resilience they have and further build on it by engaging with positive psychology approaches. Ultimately, when I'm talking about resilience, it is a construct, and it's socially, culturally, psychologically and personally constructed. So in essence, it's really difficult. Podetsky said years ago, we all know what it is until we try to define it. My definition would be, as a positive psychologist, it is about bouncing back. It is about being able to move forwards even when things go difficult. It is about being able to navigate those difficult situations and draw on resilience that we have in order to be able to keep going. And we know that resilient people are those who look for opportunities and problems, and this is what we want to be able to foster and model for our children and young people. They have a positive attitude. They will fight what I call the victim mentality, which leads you down the route of addictive behaviours. And this is really, really important. Engaging in what Martin Seligman calls learned helplessness is something that we clearly need to recognise and fight. It's a battle. It's ongoing for some of us, and some of us obviously clearly find this more difficult than others, and therefore will need more support. Resilient people are those that find their power in every situation. They can overcome difficulties because they are able to learn from their mistakes and accept constructive criticism. They don't see failure as the end of the world, okay? And they're also very, very clear about reframing their errors and their mistakes and learning from them in an effective way that doesn't damage their self-esteem. So key terms from positive psychology. Resilience, that capacity for us to bounce back, as I said, from adverse experiences. and to manage positive resources and skills such as character and grit, because these are the ones that can allow minimizing negative outcomes of adverse circumstances. So they can reduce the negative outcomes. They can't take them away totally, it's impossible, but they can reduce them, and that's what we want. Character is a set of capabilities including application, self-direction, self-regulation, so managing our emotions and the way that we respond emotionally, and empathy. And the soft skills, those soft skills that have become increasingly important more than ever now in the current context, where we are having to be so emotionally literate in terms of managing children and young people who have been out of school for a considerable amount of time and under a certain level of stress around not knowing what the new normal for them is going to be like in the classroom. We need those soft skills because they allow us to achieve our potential. And grit is really, really important. The key term of grit, the tendency to sustain interest in and effort towards very long-term goals. And ultimately, that is hugely important. Grit, keeping going, even when the goal is quite a long way off and we have lots of steps to take in order to achieve it and get there. And of course, self-control. We must never underestimate the importance of this. The regulation of behavioural, emotional and attention impulses in the presence of momentary gratifying temptations or diversions. Basically a posh way of saying that we can delay self-gratification in my book, and this is absolutely key, maintaining that level of self-control, but in all areas, not just in our habits, our social habits, but in our learning, in our work practices. So I'm just going to give you a couple of ideas here for working with staff teams in terms of resilience. The possible sequence here might be about actually engaging with each other. You might want to stop the presentation at this point and have some discussion around this. But this would be the sequence I'd use if I was working face-to-face with a staff team in a school. So we would define resilience. We would think of what it was. We would agree definitions. We would identify differences in those definitions. We'd build awareness and develop empathy for each other and support, so that there was a real sense of any programme to build resilience and support staff would be very differentiated in terms of one end and the other end of the continuum, because clearly some of us have a level of resilience that is greater than others. And also this developing emotional intelligence, and this is really, really key to this, that emotionally intelligent staff teams are the ones who get things done, are the ones who support each other effectively, are the ones who can model this resilience and emotional intelligence or literacy to the children and young people that they nurture. And they can do it effectively because they can self-regulate and they can co-regulate with children. The ones who don't do this are the ones who cannot help children to self-regulate clearly. And a lovely activity that you might want to undertake now and stop the presentation is just to think about your life snake, because again, there is something in positive psychology that I find so powerful around actually recognising and celebrating our strengths, because notwithstanding the fact that some of us will have had more adversity than others in our lives, we're where we are now, we've got here. So I get you to draw out your life snake, thinking about where you started and where you are now, and think about those ups and downs, when those things went well and when you bounced back and when not. But then what I really want you to do is think about what helped you. What was it? Were there inequalities within you? Was it your sense of humour? Was it your connectiveness to other people? Was it your relationships, key relationships? And what hindered you? What did not help you? And again, this is about self-reflection and thinking about, okay, if those things helped me to bounce back, are those the strengths now that I need to foster on and cultivate even more? Padetsky makes this clearer. She puts this into 4 stages. So at stage 1, it's about identifying those strengths, which you might be able to do from that resilience snake activity. Stage 2 is then to construct a map of those resilient strengths. And stage 3 is then to begin to think about where you can apply your strengths in other areas where you might feel weaker, you might feel less competent, you might want to improve things. So stage 4 then is about practicing those, using those strengths that you have in other areas. However, it is important to point out that resilience and well-being is not all down to the individual. There are responsibilities here. So I did do a session in this series relatively early on around peer group supervision. I think this is important. There is something about the staff team being supported through an appropriate level of supervision and support, and sometimes we get mixed up here between supervision and professional development and supervision and performance management. It's not the same thing. Supervision is there to ensure your emotional, mental, physical well-being overall. So where is that supervision? There is a responsibility of senior management, I think, in any educational institution to ensure that that happens. And you may need to think about peer group supervision, but also the organisational culture and conditions under which you work can actually build this resilience and ensure your well-being. So there is a task there, two-pronged task for the senior management in any educational context. So moving back to our children and young people and thinking about where this resilience comes from, we know ultimately it will be in our early years, in our relationships with those who nurture and protect us. And when they don't, of course, that's when the damage is done and this resilience can be undermined significantly. What we can think about here is what Linley calls golden seeds versus leaden seeds. So a golden seed refers to the way someone can often, in our early years, notice an aptitude or a talent in us. They can pick it out, they can comment on it, and it can be even just a very simple chance remark. Someone might say, "Oh yeah, Tina, that's really lovely painting. You're really talented at that. You really work hard at it. It's great, isn't it?" But we'll tuck it away, and it gives us that little expression of confidence that we need at the time. But when the time comes, we can dig up that seed, water it, and prove it true. And what's interesting is the most memorable thing a teacher can do is to give us our golden seed. And I am forever, ever grateful to the wonderful teachers I had who certainly gave me 2 or 3 golden seeds that have been nurtured over my lifetime to date and still bringing me lots of joy and lots of pleasure and enabling me now to give back things. So through my writing, definitely, and also through my creative activities. But this is really, really powerful, those golden seeds versus those leaden seeds. And we need to ensure that we, as the nurturers, are the ones who actually engender this in our children and young people and provide them with these golden seeds. And this is about realizing children's strengths, so positive psychology, realizing their strengths, okay, so individualizing them, okay, knowing them as individual young people who have their own personalities, need their own voice to be heard, allowing them that voice, holding and enabling a growth mindset. And I did a session on this earlier in the series, so very, very important. Allowing them to experiment, make mistakes, and role model this strengths approach ourselves. So we have to be a role model for this. We have to show them what it is to be resilient, to engage in positive psychology practices on a daily basis. And raising awareness of character's signature strengths is vital. And this is taken from my earlier book with the wonderful Dr. Ruth McConville, who has really inspired me throughout my whole working life since I worked with her in the London Borough of Ealing, which is a very long time ago, and she was my boss. And she's a positive psychologist and someone who has been a huge inspiration. She lives and breathes this stuff and is a real example, role model to me. And she maintains, as I do, that we need to be teaching these character or signature strengths that Martin Seligman has identified with Peterson. And this is really, really important. These traits are changeable and malleable. They can be taught, practiced, and learnt. So the value of the 24 character or signature strengths doesn't come from their relationship to any particular system of ethics, but from their practical benefits we gain from this, what an individual actually gains by possessing and expressing them. And as I'm saying, it's about expressing and using your strengths, and cultivating these really does give us a reliable path to what we would call the good life, the life of meaning. It's not simply happy. So let's move away from this simplistic notion that we're talking as positive psychologists about just being happy. It's not. It's about a life of meaning and fulfillment that we want. You know that character can function as a substitute for the social safety net. It can ease that individuals from supportive backgrounds have, that protects them from the consequences of social detours, mistakes, and bad decisions. So if we don't have that social safety net, from a really supportive background, we can develop this character so it allows us and enables us to be really protected from some of the bad things that happen or some of the bad mistakes or decisions that we make. Okay, it's really, really important. We can compensate in a different way here. Character advantages help you to succeed. So we need more grit, more social intelligence, more self-control. And teaching self-control can never be underestimated, because this is what enables us to keep going, to maintain that focus and achieve ultimately. And we want everyone to achieve positively. So if you're interested in this, you can go to the www.authentichappiness.com VIA Values in Action Signature Strengths Questionnaire. Have a go and just see what you think about that. Have some reflections on it, talk about it with colleagues and friends. So the need to ensure that we teach character education was coined and made apparent by Martin Seligman in 2011. And he talks about building a character strengths vocabulary as part of our wellbeing curriculum for children and young people. It should form part of that curriculum, which should permeate the academic curriculum, in my view. And maybe now that we're having to think so much more about mental health of children and young people, this will be something that really does begin to take a forefront. So we need to think of these words as a language that we're introducing into the classroom or school, and this character strengths vocabulary has got to be used across a range of situations throughout the school day. So in our interactions, just walking along the corridor with a child or young person, and think back to my CBT session when I talked about actually doing cognitive reframing on the hoof in a conversation in our narratives, but also just in the way in which we engage children in the classroom, in their interactions, in their work, and how we actually induce and promote in them this positive mindset, this growth mindset, and the ability to keep going and learn from mistakes. Also, what needs to permeate this positive education curriculum is this focus on recognising and celebrating children's strengths, using them, developing them. And I think it's really, really important to remember that the inability to own one's strengths, okay, many of us are guilty of this, is really partly responsible for some of our more negative responses to criticism. So when people are really upset by constructive criticism, it's really something that's quite common. If you can't say what's good about yourself, it's much, much harder to cope with your failures if you can't actually recognise your strengths in the first place. And we know that challenges are best faced with positive self-talk. So again, think back to cognitive behaviour therapy here. Make a mistake, you can tell yourself, I'll have another go. I'm smart, I'm hardworking, I'm determined, I can manage this, I can do this. So affirmations again. If we don't have this balance of positive or negative in our heads, the negative will drown out the positive. The radio will be turned up on the negative, and it's much, much harder to pull ourselves out from this. Okay, so very, very important to do this, not to fall into the trap of learned helplessness. And in this cycle of flourishing, we know that mastery is addictive, and this is why it's so powerful. Practitioners, teachers, TAs, people working with children and young people, who encourage them to accept reasonable risks and challenges while at the same time protecting them from emotional distress and feelings of failure, ensure that they experience this sense of mastery, doing something really, really well. And this is essential because this is what gives us that perception of personal capability, self-efficacy, so the capacity to influence personal outcomes. So feeling autonomous, as though I can actually determine what's going to happen to me in the future. So what does mastery bring with it? Confidence, leadership skills, initiative, and a renewed commitment to hard work. And obviously hard work, that four-letter word work, is really important, as is the word hard. Very, very vital if we're going to continue to achieve and experience this sense of mastery. And essentially what it does is experiencing mastery. It's about discovering that your work is hard, not because you ought or should, but because you want to experience the energizing feeling of mastery again and again. So feeling and experiencing mastery is absolutely addictive in a sense, and it's a really healthy addiction in my view. And it's about being able to ensure that a fearful or more vulnerable learner can become what we would call a motivated player. So giving them that opportunity to experience and feel the energizing effects of mastery will ensure that they want to experience it again in the future. So we need to set up our children to experience mastery in as many ways as possible so that this generates success. Self-esteem, confidence, leadership come from the experience of mastery. So let's provide as many opportunities in the curriculum to ensure that children experience this, that they can understand that hard work, pain, frustration, that emotional labour of learning will precede the mastery, and we can work through it and we can get through it. So we need to role model this, more important than ever. And learned optimism, repeated experiences of mastery bring this sense of optimism. And this is ultimately learned optimism, not learned helplessness. Learned optimism is the most important component of resilience. And it's tough because it's much harder to keep it going. It's much harder to maintain it, particularly when things go really bad. And sometimes it's too easy to fall back into pessimism, negativity, and actually think that some of our negative thoughts are facts and reality when they're not. So it's not about denying optimism, the negative aspects of life. It's not about saying these things don't exist, but it's about finding solutions, again, being solution focused and knowing that there's always hope. So essentially, the 4 skills involved in restructuring, thinking or reframing are crucial here. Again, refer back to CBT, the CBT session. We need to make sure that children know how to learn to recognise the negative thoughts that flit through their minds when they're feeling a wee bit down or a wee bit stressed, that they can evaluate them, they can challenge them, they can recognise that they might not be true, and they can think, is this just a feeling, is it a fact? Is my feeling a fact? No, my feeling's not a fact. I need to actually find the evidence that this is not actually true, and generate what we would call more accurate explanations. So it's not about changing a negative to a positive, as I always say. It's about challenging something that is ineffective and creating something by reframing into something that is more helpful to me. So we need to stop ourselves from ultimately planning the worst, okay, and actually planning for the best. Part of this process is in ensuring that children can do this has to be that they are acknowledged through the right kind of praise. So empty praise we do not want, okay, and we don't want person praise or clever kind, because again, as I said in the session on growth mindset, that promotes helplessness and the fear of losing the label. So, oh, I've been told I'm clever, well, I better not do that, it looks too hard, and then they'll know that I'm not clever really, okay. We need to engage in process praise, and this can never be reinforced enough. You worked really hard there. You came up with really thoughtful solutions. You found that you were really able to help your friend there and support her, and you showed real kindness and empathy. That's fabulous, okay? We should praise for effort, concentration, persistence, true grit, and for the effectiveness of the strategies rather than ability or innate talents, and we know this. We also know that positive mental states broaden and build cognitive processes. So again, positive psychology for children. Studies of induced mood have shown that compared to neutral or aggressive mood, people in a positive mood have a broader focus of attention. They can come up with more ideas, more creative ideas. They're more resilient when the stress is there. And they're more generous, empathic and tolerant of others. And clearly this is what we want for our children and young people. So vital that we are promoting these positive mental states through positive psychology. And I love this sparkle of good feelings that Fredrickson talks about. She says that positive emotions broaden our attention and thinking. So we're more likely to be creative, be more flexible, be more open-minded, and we can undo negative emotions. So very, very important. A deliberate positive experience can undo the effects of a negative one and diffuse the stress. So in order to diffuse stress, we need to ensure that we experience less negative emotions. So we need to know how to manage our stress. So build enduring physical, intellectual, social and physiological resources is what this sparkle of good feelings, positive emotions can do. And this triggers an upward developmental spiral. So it improves our flourishing and our ability to become better versions of who we are, our ideal selves, our better selves. And this is what we want for ourselves and our children and young people. Positive psychology then, in order to build these positive emotions, we need to teach children how to savour the here and now rather than living in the future and the past. How to manage bad moods, because we will get them and that's fine and that's normal, but focus on the positive aspects of the situations and find the exceptions and try to move forward. Be able to recognise and manage triggers that lead to bad moods and negativity. So again, this is about self-reflection. This is about keeping that log, keeping that diary, that journal, modelling an optimistic and can-do attitude. So again, the growth mindset. Emphasise the importance of sharing good news, leisure activities and having fun. So for example, when we're coming back into school and we're re-engaging with each other, celebrating our positive experiences, the positive emotion that we may have encountered. Okay, we will need to share some of the negatives, we will need to have some support. For some of us it will be considerable support, but in the main, as we come together, let's celebrate being together, being connected and the positive aspects, and get some really good positive memories going here as we transition back after lockdown. Understanding the importance of play, leisure activities for building emotional stress and self-mastery. Never underestimate this. The BPS recently brought out a big piece of research on this, so I make reference to that, the British Psychological Society. Very, very important. Building fun, 5-minute holidays and celebration. And I think this is really, really vital. As I said in my session on anxiety, those of us who are more troubled by our thinking and find this harder work need to actually understand and be taught the relationships between fun activities, meaningful activities, creativity, just relaxing, and an increase in positive emotions, because ultimately if we can increase our positive emotions on a daily basis, then this will engender better mental health overall. So building in that fun, activity scheduling, timetabling it in for ourselves, and ensuring that children do likewise. So quick summary, 10 ways to build your emotional resilience. So see crises as challenges to overcome, not insurmountable problems. Surrounding yourself with a positive network of friends and family, again, and this is exactly the same for children and young people. Accepting change as a part of life, it's not necessarily a disaster. Taking control, being decisive in difficult situations, and nurturing this positive view of ourselves, challenging that negative thought when we try to talk ourselves down or focus on the things that we perceive to be wrong with us. Looking for opportunities to improve, new challenges, new interests, and setting realistic goals and planning ways that we can get there, not making them too unrealistic so that we feel overwhelmed. Keeping stuff in perspective, challenging ourselves when we really overcompensate or we engage in what I call catastrophic thinking. So practicing optimism and trying to see the good side, even if we find that harder, trying to be the person with the glass half full. Practicing emotional awareness. So why am I feeling like this? Let's reflect on it a wee bit. And looking after ourselves through healthy eating, exercise, sleep, relaxation, all of these things as part of our wellbeing toolkit need to be intact. And this is not difficult to do. It's hard work, but it's not difficult if we really plan for it effectively and we support children to do likewise. With our children and young people, obviously I've talked about journaling, keeping records, expressing gratitude. These are things that as a positive psychologist I do on a daily basis. So I do 3 kind acts because I also want to plan those in, not as random acts, but thinking about other people so that it takes the onus off me. One of the things that I find personally that makes me feel happier is not to just focus on myself all the time. I can think about good things that happen during the day and record those, and this is really helpful for children at the end of the day, particularly those who are anxious. But I also need to engage in forgiveness, not holding on to bad feelings or angers about other people when they've done something wrong or something I don't approve of. And also thinking about how I can surround myself with things that really do make me feel good and engage in activities that really increase levels of well-being. So these are just some of the things that I would suggest maybe we need to support young children in practicing. So as a final activity here, I want you to just think about how you can increase the sparkle of good feelings in your life and maybe identify 3 key strategies from this presentation, this CPD Coffee time, that you could adopt tomorrow. And if you're working as part of a group, you're doing this as, a wee team somewhere, then, stop now and just have a discussion about it, think about it. because you'll be different, you'll do different things, but there may be things that I've flagged up that you possibly haven't thought about that you might want to just make a change to in your life as a direct result of this. Positive psychology for me, I live and breathe it. As I said earlier, it does work for me, and I really can't recommend it enough as a philosophy for living. And lastly, it does underpin our Wellbeing Toolkit for Mental Health Leads from Hinton House. So I am, unashamedly recommending this again, because many of the sessions you will find are imbued with positive psychology approaches and philosophy. So do take a look. I know how difficult it is in these current times to access CPD, which is why I'm doing these sessions and delivering them. I'm absolutely positively engaged with it. I think it's really, really vital that those of us who can give something back in these stressful times. So do take a look at that. Thank you once again for listening. I really hope that this has been a useful and helpful session, and it will kind of get you thinking about things and reflecting on things, and possibly particularly thinking about the connections between this approach, CBT, solution-focused approaches, and how you might be able to incorporate them still further, not only into your own life, but into the lives of the children that you support and nurture. So look forward to you joining me in the next CPD Coffee Time session.